"So, Doug, should I expect you tomorrow? Or are you only coming around next week?" The head of the loaders brigade handed a few notes to a tall, wiry boy with light blonde, slightly curly hair. Doug Williams gratefully accepted the money from the foreman for his shift at unloading. "We'll see," Doug replied with a smile. "If I don't manage my other part-time job by evening, then don't wait." The foreman nodded in understanding. "Always trying to make ends meet, huh? I respect that, Doug. You're a hard worker. I haven't met anyone like you in a long time. People usually come to us out of great need or to earn money for booze." Doug took a deep breath and answered, "You might say I'm here out of great need, because drinking never interested me." The men shook hands and parted. Doug was thankful to the man for always being ready to take him on shift. There was always a need for workers to load and unload goods at the station dock, so Doug had a steady part-time job. Doug turned 25 last month. He celebrated modestly, buying a large bag of his favourite sugar biscuits from a cheap supermarket and sharing them with his neighbours at the abandoned house where he had lived for the past 2 years. Doug had spent most of his life on the streets, wandering the region or settling temporarily in quiet towns where people were more tolerant of vagrants than in the bustling metropolis. The young man was fortunate this time. He quickly befriended a group of homeless individuals who, like him, were highly intelligent and kind-hearted, but had unfortunately fallen on hard times. Together they settled in the spacious abandoned house, where they managed to create a decent living space. Doug was not a typical homeless person who drowned his despair in alcohol or resorted to theft. He earned a modest but honest living through legal means. He worked in processing at a recycling plant or served as a labourer at the railway station. This was his standard survival strategy, which helped him to avoid any criminal activities. Doug preferred not to dwell on his childhood. His experience in the orphanage was harsh. The caregivers often mistreated him and the other children because they seemed to dislike children in general. They justified their harsh methods as realistic education. However, Doug suspected these caregivers were people who took pleasure in tormenting those weaker than themselves. Young Doug often ran away from the orphanage to escape the constant beatings and reproaches. Then he would just hang around the streets, imagining what his life could have been like if he had been lucky enough to be born into a normal, loving family. The final straw that prompted him to permanently leave the orphanage was an incident that occurred during his teenage years. During one of his unauthorized absences, Doug rescued a small, affectionate puppy from a cruel man. The man had stopped on a bridge, intending to throw the puppy, confined in a packed cardboard box, into the river. Doug happened to be passing by and heard the puppy whimpering. He quickly realized there was a living creature inside the box. "Hey man, what are you doing?" Doug asked the burly man, who was about to hurl the box into the water. "None of your business. Get out of here, kid, while your arms and legs are still intact," said the man rudely, and turned around to look at Doug. But as soon as he did so, Doug's insides clenched in pain and anger. Standing before him was not just any man, but Richard Watson, the headmaster of their orphanage. Doug had suspected for some time that their director had a mental abnormality, but such cruelty towards a puppy in broad daylight was beyond comprehension. Doug couldn't stand by and let this happen. "Mr. Watson, please put the box down," Doug requested as calmly as he could. "Don't harm the puppy." "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at roll call?" the headmaster replied with a malicious grin, and then threatened the orphanage pupil. "I'll report this to Mr. Roth. He'll deal with you in his own way. Maybe then you'll understand that running away from the orphanage isn't the best idea." At these words, Doug literally felt a pain from the bruises, still healing from the last educational conversation with the physical education teacher, Mr. Roth. He was known for using various objects when reprimanding his students. That time, Doug had been beaten with the janitor's shovel. Doug's body was covered with abrasions and bruises, rendering him bedridden for a week. Despite this, the headmaster and the teaching staff of the orphanage believed such disciplinary actions significantly improved discipline and calmness within the institution. Many children, especially the newcomers or older ones, attempted to report the teachers to the police. Sadly, their pleas fell on deaf ears. Doug suspected the local police officer was the headmaster's friend. That's why he deliberately ignored the ongoing violence and brutality. Doug chose not to contemplate the fate of those boys who sought help from other adults. He only knew such attempts were severely punished at the orphanage. "Put the box on the floor, please," the teenager asked again, more insistently this time. "Or what?" Mr. Watson retorted, a grin of insolence on his face. He dangled the box over the silvery surface of the river, holding it so that it practically hung from his fingers. "You fool, Doug. No matter how many times I beat you, you never learn. Pity and feelings are our greatest weaknesses and enemies in life. Oh, you took pity on a street dog? Have you ever considered what will happen when it grows up? It'll be just like you, wandering the streets. At best, it'll starve to death under some fence. At worst, they'll catch her and do unimaginable things to her. Things you wouldn't dream of in your worst nightmares." Saying this, the headmaster studied the box with the puppy for a while, and then added in a muted tone, "In a way, I'm doing this dog a favour, showing her mercy. Better to end its suffering now than to let them magnify 100-fold later." "Who are you to determine who gets to live and who doesn't?" Doug retorted defiantly, his voice echoing with a steely resolve. "You don't have the authority to inflict harm on the children in the orphanage either, so you'd better give me the puppy if you don't want to make things worse for you." "Are you threatening to make my life difficult?" Mr. Watson responded, a sudden burst of laughter escaping him. "Oh, that's funny. Listen here, Williams. Remember this. I won't hesitate to grind you to dust with my own bare hands, if it comes to that. Your existence will remain unknown. The world doesn't have a place for people like you. One less vagrant on the streets means one less mouth to feed. Your absence won't cause anyone to shed a tear." Deciding that it was the opportune moment to act, Doug lunged at the headmaster. With a quick, well-aimed move, he aimed a kick at the man's shin. Caught off guard, the headmaster let out a howl of pain and involuntarily let the box out of his hands. "Williams!" the furious headmaster bellowed. "Once you're back at the orphanage, I'll make sure you feel the wrath of my hands. You'll end up in the infirmary for a month, licking your injuries. You ungrateful little brat." Doug, however, did not wait around to hear more. Without a moment's hesitation, he scooped up the box and ran. He ran down the street as fast as his legs would carry him. Returning to the orphanage was now out of the question for Doug. He was painfully aware that if he did, he would be subjected to a severe punishment. The headmaster was right. Nobody would be aware of his plight, and he would not be missed. Having reached a seemingly safe place, a distant street in a residential area of the city, Doug finally allowed himself to stop. He sat down on an old bench, carefully placing the box beside him. With trembling fingers, Doug cautiously opened the box to discover a pair of terrified black eyes and a sharp fox-like face staring back at him. The puppy was a thin, underfed crossbreed of a dachshund and a breed similar to a corgi. Upon seeing Doug, the puppy whimpered again and attempted to stick her head out. "Come here, little one," Doug coaxed, gently lifting the dog out of the box. He held it close to his chest and started stroking her softly, while the puppy continued whimpering. "Don't cry. Everything will surely turn out all right from this point forward," Doug, in his soothing voice, reassured the trembling creature. The little puppy, with its pitiful eyes, looked up at the young boy and then, in a gesture of trust, nestled itself against him, seeking comfort and warmth. "I've decided that I'll call you Lucky. Does that sound all right to you?" Doug asked the dog. Upon hearing the sound of his new name, the puppy began to wag her tail with such enthusiasm it was as if she was expressing his approval of the name chosen. That's wonderful, Lucky. We're about to embark on an entirely new chapter of our lives now, and no one will dare to infringe upon our happiness, especially not those miscreants from the orphanage." Lucky seemed to comprehend Doug's tone, and in response let out a soft, yet assertive growl. "Yes, my dear companion, I'm overjoyed that you're with me," the boy responded softly, and gently cradling the puppy in his arms, started to amble down the quiet street. From that moment onward, Doug and Lucky were an inseparable duo. A couple of years later, Lucky grew into a beautiful, stout, chocolate-coloured dog that bore striking similarities to a corgi. Doug would always bring her along on his small wandering around the town and its outskirts. Unfortunately, a year ago, Lucky passed away. Doug buried her in a forest belt outside the city and took a long time to recover from this profound loss. After finishing his shift at the rail station, the young man returned to his dwelling. His fellow tenants were waiting for him, having decided to make fish soup in a small cast-iron cauldron that evening. The unbearable aroma of tinned fish soup, which most likely was long overdue, made Doug involuntarily wrinkle his nose at the foul smell, but he managed to maintain a friendly smile on his face as he waved at the other homeless people. "Oh, Doug's back!" exclaimed Carlos, a former stock market speculator who gambled so much that he lost not only his savings but also his house. "We're cooking fish soup here. It's almost ready. Come, join us," his neighbour invited him. "Thank you, Carlos," Doug responded, nodding respectfully towards the chowder. "I'm sure this soup will be delicious, but I've already eaten today. Maybe next time." "I see. You don't want to overeat at night." Carlos playfully winked at him. "All you young folks are watching your figure, even when you're at the bottom of the life. For me, if there's an opportunity to eat, take it." Carlos kept muttering something good-natured under his nose, while Doug managed to slip into his room. There, he carefully transferred the day's earnings from unloading to a special tin box. The next day, he planned to visit the local shopping centre to buy new trainers. His current pair, worn for the last few years, were falling apart. He had been diligently saving from each paycheck for a new pair he had already eyed in the sale section of the store. After a strenuous day, Doug settled comfortably into his makeshift bed and instantly fell asleep. Having worked a shift at the station, he always managed to fall asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. The next day, Doug enjoyed bright, colourful window shopping at the shopping centre. Finally, deciding to shop for shoes, Doug traversed the long archway leading to another section of the mall. En route, he passed a bustling children's playground. The sight of children laughing and playing with an oversized inflatable ball brought a smile to his face. He found himself yearning for a similar childhood, one without fear, waiting for loving parents who would treat him to delicious ice cream. A sudden rush of tears blurred his vision, which he quickly wiped away. And then he noticed something unusual. In the back of the bustling playground, there stood an impressively tall, square-shaped stage with a ramp. It was engulfed in a multitude of bright lights that painted the area with a festive and joyful mood. This stage, as Doug knew, was a place for animators who performed lively shows to delight and entertain the children, while their parents were off busying themselves with shopping. However, at this moment, there were no adults within sight. This was an anomaly, especially considering the safety rules that stipulated there should always be someone present to keep an eye on the working electrical device. Doug, heeding an inner instinct, approached the stage. Suddenly he noticed a worrying sight. The base of the stage was beginning to emit a trail of smoke. Adjacent to the stage, a young girl of about 6 or 7 years old was engrossed in her own world, playing with an oversized teddy bear. She was blissfully unaware of the potential danger brewing behind her. The smoke from beneath the stage grew denser, and the acrid smell of burning wires filled Doug's nostrils. "Hey, girl!" shouted Doug, trying to alert the little girl. "You need to move away from here. It's not safe." The young girl looked at him with a puzzled expression, shrugged her shoulders, and then turned back to her teddy bear. seemingly unperturbed by his warning. Doug looked around nervously, trying to find the person on duty. However, there was still no one on the spot. "Hey!" Doug called out again, this time with a sense of urgency. "I'm not joking. It's really dangerous. Can't you see the smoke?" Just as he finished his sentence, the stage hissed violently, like an enraged serpent. The multitude of light bulbs embedded in it began to burst, one after another, creating a cacophony of loud pops and crackles. A hot wave of sparks and flames immediately engulfed the surrounding space. Recognizing the imminent danger, Doug did not hesitate. Grabbing the little girl, Doug only had time to dig her with his body as the whole burning structure collapsed on him with a rumble. The girl in his arms cried loudly, but the young man only pressed her harder against him. Doug felt no pain. His senses were numbed, creating an illusionary vacuum around him, punctuated only by distant, muffled screams and a woman's frantic shriek that cut through the air. The realization that his back was searing with pain jolted him back to reality. With adrenaline fueling his every move, Doug urgently freed himself from the wreckage, all the while clutching a little girl close to his chest. "Give her to me!" A shrill female voice pierced the cacophony of sounds around him. Without a second thought, Doug handed the girl over to the woman, gasping for breath. "Don't move. I've already alerted the fire department and the ambulance," the woman ordered, and then proceeded to douse Doug's smouldering back with a handheld fire extinguisher. The sudden, shocking contrast in temperature sent chills down his spine, and, overwhelmed, Doug sank into unconsciousness. His final conscious memory was the distraught face of a young girl. She wore a large rainbow-coloured bow in her hair, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets due to her incessant tears. "God, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice shaky and laced with guilt. These words echoed in Doug's mind as his world was engulfed by darkness. When Doug awoke, he found himself in the sterile environment of a hospital's intensive care unit, lying on his stomach. The doctor explained to him that he had undergone major surgery due to the extensive and severe burns on his back. "You'll need ample time for recovery," the doctor warned. "You're fortunate that your nerve endings were not damaged. It could have been much worse. That girl at the shopping centre did the right thing by extinguishing the fire on your back promptly." "The girl," Doug murmured weakly. "There was a little girl. Is she unharmed?" "The little girl is fine, don't worry," the doctor reassured him. "You've acted like a true hero. Now your job is to rest and recover. The little girl has been safely returned to her father. The shopping centre management and their electricians will be held accountable. It appears they overlooked a fault which resulted in a loose contact and subsequently a short circuit." Barely able to process the information, Doug managed to ask, "How did you know all this?" "I have a friend who is the chief of the fire brigade that responded to the incident," the doctor replied with a sad smile. "I'm telling you all this so you can rest easy." "What about the young woman on duty? She left the playground and children unattended," Doug inquired, his voice barely audible. The doctor shrugged. "I don't have information about her, but she won't be let off easily." He then stood up to leave, adding, "I'll have the nurse administer another dose of anesthesia. Rest, and we'll change your dressing later." Left alone, Doug began to process the events. He felt relief knowing the little girl was safe. He also felt a tinge of sympathy for the woman on duty, despite her negligence. Of course, she didn't want this to happen. A lengthy and challenging journey of recovery began for Doug. His days in the hospital were filled with the monotony of endless bandage changes, the incessant itching that came from healing skin, and the haunting nightmares in which he relived the horrifying scene of the burning mall. But after a month of treatment, his attending physician finally said, "Well, you'll be staying with us for a couple more weeks, and then you'll be done," the doctor said with a comforting smile on his face. You'll be as good as new, except for a few scars on your back." "It's nothing." Doug shrugged it off. "Doctor, you have no idea how much I'm yearning to leave this place. Don't get me wrong, I'm tremendously grateful to you for everything you've done for me, but—" "Say no more," the doctor responded calmly. "Do you think I don't understand? A hospital is a hospital. The important thing is to keep your visits here as infrequent as possible. Please excuse speaking about that, but I see that life hasn't been exactly kind to you. Where will you go when you're discharged?" Doug looked at the compassionate doctor with a warm smile. He appreciated the man's genuine care and understanding, and was touched by his sincere concern for his well-being. "I have a place," Doug replied. "If my acquaintances haven't given it away, I'll return there. If it's already occupied, well, I'll find another place to spend the night." The doctor shook his head in disappointment. "It's not right that a kind-hearted young man like you will sleep on the streets. Here." He reached into the pocket of his medical coat and pulled out a business card. "Try this if things get too rough. It's the new charity centre that opened just 2 months ago. They provide assistance to the homeless, including meals, a place to sleep and wash, if space is available. They can also help with employment opportunities. They sometimes have job openings from social services that they collaborate with, and from small private firms looking for handymen. Please take it, it might be helpful." Doug gratefully accepted the business card and shook the doctor's outstretched hand. 2 weeks after his discharge, Doug returned to his makeshift home in the abandoned house. Much to his relief, not much had changed during his absence. His old vagabond acquaintances still lived there, and they had taken care of his belongings. "Doug, we thought we had lost you for good. Where have you been all this time?" asked Carlos. "I had an accident." Doug shared his story, detailing everything that had occurred. At the end of his storytelling, he added, "I sincerely appreciate you keeping my place and not discarding any of my belongings." "What are you talking, Doug? How could we?" exclaimed Carlos, hugging him. "You're like family to us. We thought something happened to you, but you don't carry a phone, so we didn't know where to look." "Yes, it's a problem, I agree," Doug said apologetically. "Don't worry, Carlos. I promise I'll solve this issue when I get the chance. We really need to stay in contact." Carlos nodded in agreement. Afterward, they went to drink tea, which their third acquaintance, Scott, had already brewed. This silent, homeless man only voiced his opinion on special occasions. Nobody knew much about him, other than his love for fishing and a rumoured past in the police force. The latter was always discussed in whispers and taken as more of a rumour. "Hello, Doug," Scott greeted him discreetly. "Glad you're okay." Doug nodded back at him and settled onto the old straw mattress, and right away a dull pain shot through his back. He gritted his teeth, trying not to show his discomfort to the others. Despite his efforts, his suddenly pale face gave him away. "Doug, are you ill?" Carlos asked excitedly, promptly bringing a mug of tea to his lips. "Drink this, dear. It should make you feel better." Doug thanked his neighbour and sipped the hot drink. To his surprise, it was excellent black tea, with raspberry leaves floating in it. "I've been drying leaves since last summer," Scott answered his unasked question. "Regardless of what others say, I believe nature is better than any chemistry for healing." "You're right," Doug responded. "The hospital warned me that my back would ache until the skin fully healed. I didn't expect it to be this bad." The young man sighed heavily and hung his head. He had hoped the healing process was complete and would no longer need the painkillers that left him dizzy. However, it wasn't that simple. "I think I'll go lie down if you don't mind," Doug said, standing up. The men nodded as Doug slowly returned to his place. After swallowing 2 pills of the medicine with a gulp of water, he collapsed onto the hard mattress. That night he couldn't sleep properly. Shadows danced in the darkness, and cold sweat drenched his forehead and neck. After tossing and turning for several hours, Doug gave up trying to sleep. Instead, he carefully sat up in bed and pulled out the business card the doctor had given him. "I'll go there tomorrow," Doug decided. "Maybe they can help me." The next morning, Doug visited the charity centre first thing. He hoped to find a job and perhaps get a free lunch in the canteen. A polite woman greeted him at the entrance and, after understanding his purpose, guided him to the employment office. Unfortunately, luck was not on Doug's side at this point. All the available vacancies were filled. A social worker advised him to return in early September. Doug sighed but nodded in understanding and thanked the worker for her time. He then made his way to the large dining room on the first floor. Upon entering, he was greeted by the wonderful aroma of freshly cooked chicken chowder and the scent of vegetable stew. He joined the queue of 20 other hungry homeless people who had arrived at the centre that morning, patiently awaiting his turn with his tray and cutlery. Finally reaching the serving window, 2 volunteers, a young man and a woman, were serving food that day. The man was busy serving soup to another person, so Doug had to speak to the woman, whose long wavy curls were hidden under a grey cap. "Hello, can I have a portion of soup? It smells so good in here," Doug said. "Sure," she replied, smiling as she ladled a large portion of hot golden broth onto his plate. "Grab a second portion as well. The cook made a lot today, guessing that there would be a lot of people coming in." As the woman handed him his plate, their eyes met, and all of a sudden she turned as pale as the first snow, nearly dropping the ladle from her trembling fingers. Doug stared at her, unable to believe his eyes. "You?" was all Doug could utter. "Oh!" she shrieked, hastily placing the plate on Doug's tray, nearly spilling its contents. I'm sorry. She quickly turned to her partner, her voice trembling. "Ben, can you cover me for a minute? I don't feel well." She took off her apron and slipped out from behind the counter, ignoring the unhappy murmurs from the other diners. "Wait, you misunderstood me," Doug shouted after her. She either didn't hear him or chose to ignore him, continuing to move between the glass food display cases until she disappeared into the kitchen. "Man, don't hold up the queue," a gruff voice called from behind Doug. Doug apologized, left the canteen and rushed after the serving girl. She was the same girl who had abandoned the children on that fateful day at the shopping centre. Doug immediately recognized her large grey eyes, which were makeup-free today. He could see the genuine guilt and fear in those eyes. Around the charity centre building, Doug spotted her again sitting on a bench near the back entrance, crying bitterly. "What's wrong?" Doug asked. "Are you so upset with me? I didn't mean to frighten you, I'm sorry." The distressed girl slowly took her palm away from her weeping and tear-stained face and looked at Doug with unbearable bitterness. "God, I feel so guilty. Please, forgive me if you can. I just thought you wanted revenge on me personally." "Why?" Doug asked with a slight smile. "You've suffered so much because of me," the girl sobbed. I thought you'd be crippled. I tried to visit you at the hospital, but the doctor wouldn't let me in. Only family members were allowed." "Wait, you came to the hospital to see me?" Doug was taken aback, never expecting this young woman, barely 20, would care about his condition after what happened at the mall. "Don't think I haven't been punished," she tried to explain. "I was fired that same day, wasn't paid for my shift, and was even fined heavily. They blamed me for the stage catching fire. I didn't mean for it to happen. I just went to wash my hands. I was painting with the kids and needed to clean off the paint. I was only gone for 5 minutes. Who knew it would turn out so badly?" She lowered her head into her hands, sobbing. "Please understand me. I don't have any more money to help you," she said through her tears. "I still owe money to this mall from my salary." Doug felt deeply sorry for this unfortunate girl, who seemed to be as much a victim as he was. Sitting next to her on the bench, Doug reached out his hand. "My name is Doug. What's yours?" The girl slowly looked up at him, then cautiously shook his hand. "I'm Mary." "Nice to meet you," Doug responded, smiling. "Mary, please don't worry so much. I'm not angry with you over the fire. Thankfully, we were able to save that little girl. and none of the other children were hurt. "Really?" Mary asked, hope shining in her reddened eyes. "You mean you don't want to demand huge compensation from me, or curse me to my 7th knee?" Doug laughed softly and shook his head. "No, that was definitely not in my plans. I was angry with you at first, thinking you had abandoned the children, but now I see you're being honest. It was just an unfortunate coincidence." Mary gave him a weak smile through her tears. "Thank you for believing me. It's just a shame the shopping centre and playground management don't see it that way. To some extent they're right. I shouldn't have left the playground, but the stage had been malfunctioning for a while, and when it couldn't handle another power surge, the blame fell on the most vulnerable employee. That's me." She gave a sad grin and wiped her face with her uniform sleeve. "Do you volunteer here every day?" Doug asked. "No, only twice a week," Mary answered. "Now I sell tickets at the cinema, and I come here because I like helping people, that's all." She shrugged bashfully. At that moment, Doug realised he wanted to see Mary again. "So, now that we've cleared that up, would you mind if I visit during your shifts?" Doug asked hopefully. Mary studied him before nodding. "And not just here. Come to the North Wind tomorrow night. It's the cinema where I work. They just got a new action film. I'll let you in, and you can watch it in peace." Doug was ecstatic. The chance to see Mary again and to visit a cinema, which he hadn't done since he was 10, delighted him, and he thanked her profusely. "Oh, please," Mary responded, laughing at his gratitude. "I'm just glad I could do something for you." Doug looked at her solemnly. "You know, I just realised something." "What's that?" Mary asked, intrigued. "If you hadn't put out the fire from me, then, in the shopping centre, I wouldn't be sitting here now." Mary's cheeks turned bright red, and she quickly lowered her glowing grey eyes. "I have to go, Doug. I need to finish my shift." With that, Mary hopped off the bench and ran back into the charity centre, leaving Doug alone with his thoughts and the budding feelings of first love. Another month passed. Doug continued his life as usual, but now Mary, whom he began dating, became a part of it. It was important to him that Mary saw his vagrancy not as a negative aspect, but just another part of him. The girl did not care that Doug lived in the old abandoned house. Instead, she felt genuine sympathy and tenderness for him. They didn't voice it, but both understood that their feelings for each other were real. Mary knew that Doug needed to get his life first, so she refrained from declaring her love. Coming from a modest background herself, she did her best to afford the rent for her room in a small hostel. In short, the relationship between Doug and Mary developed in its own way, and between them reigned idyll and mutual understanding. Doug found it odd that Mary didn't like talking about her parents. He had openly told her about his upbringing in an orphanage and his escape from its dreadful conditions. Mary expressed sincere affection for Doug, yet only revealed that her parents never understood her. That's why she chose to live independently and move from the village to the city. Doug empathized, acknowledging the generational gap could often cause misunderstandings. However, he expressed hope that Mary might eventually reconcile with her family. "To be honest, I don't really believe in it," Mary told him. "My dad is such a stern and overbearing man that he will never forgive me for living here. He's very conservative and hates the thought of living any other way than what he dictates." Doug hugged Mary tightly and promised her, "You'll see, Mary. Everything will be fine with you, for sure. I'm ready to move mountains for you. I've been promised a job at your volunteer centre in the autumn. I hope it will help me improve my social standing." "I believe you, Doug," Mary said quietly, burying her nose in his jacket. "I believe in you, and will support you in everything, I promise." One day, while Doug was unloading goods at the railway station, Scott unexpectedly approached him. Doug was surprised because the usually silent homeless man had never shown interest in his work, especially not in broad daylight. "Hello, Scott," Doug greeted him. "Everything all right? Nothing happened at home?" "No," Scott shook his head. "Well, I didn't come empty-handed. Here, take this." With these words, he pulled a small folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Doug. "What's this?" Doug asked in surprise. "And you unfold it there, and you'll find out what's in it," said Scott a little grumpily. "I don't make a habit of reading other people's letters." Doug looked at the man in puzzlement, but unfolded the note. It contained only a few sentences. "Dear Mr. Williams, I suggest you visit the Blue Tower Business Centre to receive a legitimate reward for saving my daughter. I know this seems like a rather belated offer, but I was on a long business trip abroad. I hope you won't refuse to meet me. Anthony Greenspan, CEO of White Sales." "Where did you get this note? Who gave it to you?" Doug asked Scott. But the man simply shook his head. "I don't know who wrote it. A man in black approached me on the street. He handed me this note and told me, the sooner the better. He also gave me 200s for quick delivery." Scott smiled slyly and pointed to the note in Doug's hands. "Serious people must be interested in you, if they're sending messengers. If I were you, I'd go there today to see what they have to offer." Doug just shrugged his shoulders. He understood the note was from the businessman whose daughter he had saved from a fire at the playground some time ago, but he didn't expect any reward, because that's what any decent person would do. Despite everything, a strange feeling told him it was worth going to the business centre, a premonition Doug had started to trust. After wrapping up his work, he made his way to the Blue Tower. This enormous business high-rise was situated in the city's most prestigious district, filled with luxury stores and business-clad pedestrians. For a moment, Doug felt like he had stepped into an entirely different world. His modest residence was on the city's outskirts, and he rarely ventured into the city centre. He preferred to stay out of sight of the police and not cross paths with the wealthy. Aware of his position in the city social system, he tried not to cause any trouble for himself or others. Nonetheless, deep down, Doug yearned for a taste of the lifestyle of these well-dressed individuals, dining in upscale restaurants and driving fancy cars. "Good afternoon," he greeted the receptionist upon entering the business centre. "I'm here to see Mr. Greenspan. I have an appointment." The receptionist, a girl with neatly straightened hair and a ballerina-like figure, examined Doug sceptically from head to toe. Then her thin eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Your surname, please?" she requested in a neutral tone, preparing to check her work tablet. "Doug Williams," Doug responded, thinking he would be thrown out of there any moment. However, a minute later, the woman politely smiled at him. "Mr. Greenspan is expecting you. Please proceed to the 24th floor, where someone will meet you and escort you to the correct office." Doug briefly thanked the secretary and cautiously entered the dazzlingly sparkling, completely transparent glass elevator. Upon arriving upstairs, he was greeted by Mr. Greenspan's personal guard, who escorted him to the businessman's office. As he approached the door, Doug felt an unusual excitement, as if his entire life relied on this meeting with the renowned businessman. "Calm down," Doug mentally instructed himself. "Why are you nervous, Doug? You were assured that the girl is fine." Doug entered the spacious, lavishly furnished office and stood silently in the centre. Directly in front of him, with his back to Doug, stood Mr. Greenspan, one of the region's most influential businessmen. The tall, athletic man, appearing around 50, held a small cup of black coffee in his hands and patiently waited for his unusual guest. "I'm glad you came to see me today, Doug," the businessman said, turning around. "I've long wanted to meet the man who saved my daughter's life." Upon seeing Doug, Mr. Greenspan's hands trembled, almost spilling coffee on his suit. His complexion paled, resembling a sheet of office paper, and he clutched the back of his leather chair for support. "Are you feeling ill?" a puzzled Doug asked. Should I call an ambulance?" "My pills are in the cupboard on the top shelf. Please fetch them." Without a word, Doug retrieved the medication and delivered it with a glass of water. The businessman swallowed the pills and unexpectedly seized Doug's right hand, focusing on a small, round mole under his thumb. "Should I call an ambulance after all?" Doug asked, concern tinging his voice. "You don't appear to be well." Mr. Greenspan raised his pale face to him and quietly commanded, "Please sit down. We need to have a serious discussion." From Mr. Greenspan's stern tone, Doug anticipated an intense conversation. As he carefully settled into the chair opposite, Mr. Greenspan rose, closed the office door, and locked it from the inside. "Tell me about yourself," the businessman began. "Who are you? Where did you grow up? Who are your parents?" "But why are you interested in that?" Doug asked, reasonably curious. In response, Mr. Greenspan merely raised his eyebrows suggestively. "You see, I need to understand a certain matter, and I can't do so without the full context of some events. So, begin." The man patted Doug encouragingly on the shoulder, then reclined in his chair, folded his hands and prepared to listen attentively. With a sigh, Doug proceeded to recount his life story, his time in the orphanage, his friend Lucky, and his current residence in an abandoned house with other homeless people. Upon finishing his tale, Doug deeply regretted his decision to come here. It was evident that something was off with this businessman. After listening to Doug's story, an astonished Mr. Greenspan whispered, "Truly, your ways are mysterious, Lord." Then Mr. Greenspan slowly turned his right palm towards Doug. To Doug's surprise, under the thumb of the businessman's right hand was a mole identical to his own. "Wow, what a coincidence," Doug muttered, gazing at the mole. He was utterly perplexed by what this eccentric rich man could possibly want from him. "No, son, it's not a coincidence at all." Mr. Greenspan shook his head. "I'm going to show you something now. Just promise me that you won't try to run away or do anything out of the ordinary. All right?" Doug felt uneasy. He had no idea what Mr. Greenspan was planning, but he knew he couldn't just run away. "All right," Doug nodded. Mr. Greenspan gave him a slightly confused look and opened his laptop, saying, "I decided to digitalize the family photo archive a while ago, so it must be here somewhere. Wait a minute." He nervously searched his computer, then exclaimed loudly, "Yes, here they are. Take a look, Doug." Mr. Greenspan turned the laptop screen towards the young man. Doug, looking at several photos displayed, was struck with amazement. His own reflection stared back at him from old colour photos taken in the 80s and early 90s. A young man, looking strikingly similar to Doug, smiled pleasantly at the camera. The only differences were his clothes and a slightly different hairstyle, distinguishing him from Doug. "Who is it?" Doug stuttered. "Why does he look so much like me?" Mr. Greenspan merely smiled indulgently. "It's me, Doug, in person. Doesn't he look like me?" The man pointed his hand questioningly at himself, offering Doug a visual comparison. Only then did Doug notice the striking similarity between the businessman and the young man in the photo. They had the same slightly curly hair, the same light green eyes, and they also mirrored Doug's appearance. "How is that possible?" Doug asked Mr. Greenspan with a hoarse voice. The businessman sighed heavily, his smile instantly fading. "You see, many years ago, when I was just starting my business, I learned how ruthless business partners can be, especially if you refuse to give them half your business and capital." "You mean," Doug interrupted, "someone betrayed you?" "My best friend," Mr. Greenspan nodded, "and also my partner, my right-hand man." The man leaned back heavily in his chair, lost in his memories. Alejandro had been with me for as long as I can remember. We attended school and college together. Later we started a business together. He was my assistant, an excellent negotiator, but it seemed like he was always hiding something from me. Mr. Greenspan began, taking a deep breath before sorrowfully concluding. It's a pity I understood it too late. When he came with his guys and said ultimately that I should give him my half of the business, I was stunned. I lost my voice, unable to comprehend that my best friend could steal from me. But Alejandro wasn't joking. As Mr. Greenspan shared his story, his hands slowly clenched into fists, reflecting the pain and despair of a past he couldn't change. He took me to the forest and beat me so severely that I mentally bid farewell to my wife and son. I survived miraculously. A hunter accidentally found me the next morning and, frightened, called an ambulance. Doug listened to the man's story in amazement. However, one question tormented Doug. How does he fit into Mr. Greenspan's story? Soon Doug would find his answer. As it turned out, Alejandro wasn't satisfied with just destroying me. He wanted to take away my most precious possession, something I wouldn't hesitate to give my life for, Mr. Greenspan said, looking at Doug. He succeeded, Doug. He kidnapped my only son, demanding a huge ransom and all my shares. Doug exhaled loudly, anticipating the tragic conclusion of the story. What did you do? He asked cautiously. I did what any desperate man would do. I trusted the police. What a fatal mistake, Mr. Greenspan exclaimed, thumping his fist on the table and causing the papers on it to jump. I told him I had the ransom and was ready to hand over it, but when we got to the location, nobody was there. Alejandro called me and said I would never see my son again. He didn't specify what he did, but made it clear that I shouldn't hope for anything more. Mr. Greenspan wiped his face with a handkerchief, removing the sweat that had formed, and ended his story. I managed to keep the business, but I lost you forever, son, he said, addressing Doug. I searched for you everywhere, both in the country and abroad, but found nothing. It was as if someone had intentionally erased all traces leading to you. Only then did it dawn on Doug that Mr. Greenspan had mistaken him for his long-lost son, who had disappeared more than 20 years ago. No, I'm sorry, but that can't be, he muttered uncertainly. If we were relatives, surely someone at the orphanage would have told me about this. How? The businessman asked, skepticism in his eyes. The aim of those people was to hide you as far away as possible, preferably so you could never even suspect that you could be a wealthy man's son. Maybe that's why they put you in such a terrible place, hoping you wouldn't endure the horrific conditions there. Mr. Greenspan sadly shook his head. It's a pity your mum didn't live to see this moment, Doug. She died shortly after learning you would never return home. The pain was too much for her heart. Ellie, my daughter, the girl you saved, she's the child of my second wife, Helen. Ellie is a wonderful girl. I'll be eternally grateful to you for saving your half-sister. What? Doug couldn't believe his ears. Are you telling me that Ellie and I we're related? Anthony Greenspan nodded in reply and showed Doug his birthmark again. You see, this birthmark is passed from father to son in our family. My grandfather had it, I have it too, and it's also on you. There's no doubt about it, but if you allow me, I would like to do a DNA test to finally dispel your doubts. Doug sat across from the businessman, utterly bewildered. He exclaimed, What a twist! I came seeking help and ended up finding my own father. Is this real, or am I dreaming? Doug had always dreamed of escaping the streets, but he lacked knowledge, education, and simple human connections. He couldn't believe his sudden stroke of luck. So, He concluded hesitantly, "There's a chance you're my father?" "I'm more than sure. I'm 100% sure," replied Mr. Greenspan with a smile. "If you'd like, we can go to the lab today for confirmation. Doug, I'm serious. I've been searching for you for years. You're my direct heir. I need to teach you everything I know so you can take over the company. And don't worry, you'll get a proper education too. You can attend any university in the country, but please don't leave now," he pleaded, his gaze filled with longing. Overwhelmed, Doug rose from his seat and embraced Anthony Greenspan tightly. Through his tears, he whispered, "I'm so glad you've found me at last." Anthony Greenspan hugged him back just as tightly and said, "Doug, my son, I thank God for giving me the chance to find you again." Their embrace was tight, as though they were trying to make up for the lost years in a single hug. The DNA test confirmed the blood relationship between Doug and Anthony Greenspan. The father planned to give Doug his surname, provide him with a new passport, and introduce him formally to their family company. Additionally, he hired a skilled private detective to uncover how Doug ended up in the orphanage. The detective's findings arrived within weeks. As Mr. Greenspan suspected, Alejandro had brought Doug to the orphanage and had paid the headmaster handsomely for his silence. Determined to seek justice, Mr. Greenspan used his connections in the prosecutor's office to ensure the headmaster and all his staff were either fired or imprisoned for their cruel treatment of the children. The orphanage was subsequently closed, and the children were relocated to better facilities. Meanwhile, Doug started to feel normal again. He left the abandoned house and gave his former neighbours a generous gift of money, ensuring they remembered him as a benefactor and friend. Doug himself soon began his first apprenticeship. His father began to take him to the company almost every day, so that the guy would gradually get used to what would be waiting for him when he completely transformed from a homeless guy into a confident and knowledgeable businessman. Doug was glad to become a part of Mr. Greenspan's family, especially as his stepmother Helen took the appearance of her husband's native son quite calmly. She was a wise woman and understood that her husband's happiness was as important as her own. Little Ellie, learning that she had an older brother who had saved her, began to idolize Doug. She often called him a hero and enjoyed playing with him, pretending to be a bird or a brave pilot on his shoulders. Surprisingly, Mary was the only one upset by Doug's life changes. Learning that his father was a well-known businessman, she became sad and distant. "Mary, what happened?" Doug asked, puzzled. "Has anything changed between us? Are you worried I might leave you now? That I'm not poor anymore? I promise you, I will always love you, regardless of your status." Mary affectionately kissed him, but her eyes remained sad. "No, Doug, it's not about you." She tried to explain, but always stopped short. "What is it?" Doug insisted. "Tell me, what's the problem? Don't you love me anymore? Don't you want to be with me? Why? Don't I deserve to know?" Mary just cried, unable to hold back her emotions. "I wish I could tell you everything," she sobbed, "but I can't. I can't." A rift had certainly grown between them. After this conversation, they started seeing each other less frequently. Doug realized that he would lose his beloved Mary forever if he didn't take decisive action. Convinced of his plan, Doug bought a beautiful diamond ring for his future bride. He wanted to propose in a special romantic way, but first he needed to ask her out on a date. However, Mary's phone was unreachable, no matter how many times Doug tried. He began to worry when he suddenly received a disturbing message. It was a picture of Mary tied to a chair, crying, with a gun to her head. The caption below the photo read, "Come alone to the industrial zone. If you tell the cops or your father, your woman won't live." There was the address where Doug needed to go. The young man was ready to blast off at the same minute, but still, he realized that he couldn't do so without his father's advice in this situation. Acknowledging the risk he was taking, Doug went to his father's office and explained everything. "Show me the photo," Mr. Greenspan requested. His son dutifully opened the file on his phone. "How long have you been seeing this girl?" Mr. Greenspan asked with astonishment. "About 6 months. We met when I was just a homeless man," Doug replied, looking at his father in confusion. "Did Mary ever talk about her parents? Did she tell you about their occupations?" Mr. Greenspan asked cautiously. "No," Doug shook his head, "only that she ran away from home because she didn't want to yield to her father's wishes." Hearing those words, Mr. Greenspan began to pace the room. He couldn't believe his son had fallen for such an obvious trick. "Dad, explain to me what's going on." Doug was confused. "How are we going to save Mary?" Mr. Greenspan paused before his son and quietly said, "I suspect that Alejandro planned your fiancé's kidnapping." "What?" was all Doug could utter. "Why do you think that?" "Now is not the time. I'll explain everything later. Here's what we're going to do now." An hour later, Doug and his father were speeding along a rural road, drawing closer each minute to an abandoned industrial zone filled with old neglected warehouses and garages. Upon reaching their destination, they received a call. A mechanical voice, distorted by a special program, curtly informed them that Doug was about to be met. However, when Doug stepped out of the SUV, he didn't expect to be surrounded by an entire squad. "Hey, puppy, couldn't do without your daddy, could you?" Alejandro smugly asked Doug, as he and Mr. Greenspan were led into the vast warehouse. "Where's my fiancé, you jerk?" Doug asked grimly. "What have you done with Mary?" Alejandro pretended not to understand. "Who's Mary? Is this the girl you're talking about?" The next moment, one of Alejandro's guards rolled out an old office chair from a closed back room. Mary was tied to it with tape and rope, sobbing and whimpering. "Alejandro, don't be foolish. Let the girl go," said Doug's father as calmly as possible. "She's not guilty of anything. Furthermore—" "What? You haven't told your idiot son anything yet?" Alejandro sneered, then turned to Doug. "You've done well, boy. You've charmed my daughter to the point that she defies her family's rules. My rules." As he said these last words, Alejandro's eyes flared like a wolf ready to attack. "What do you mean?" Doug demanded, his heart torn between hatred for Alejandro and pity for the tormented Mary. "This poor girl isn't Mary at all. I believe that's how she introduced herself to you, isn't it?" Alejandro glanced at him caustically, then continued triumphantly. "This is my daughter, Becky Plano. She's going to marry the son of an old enemy, you. Do you think I would allow such a mismatch, especially considering that I already had the perfect fiancé for Becky in mind? Unfortunately, she ran away from home upon learning she was to marry Arthur this winter. She even changed her name and worked in the middle of nowhere. Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Alejandro said, and painfully squeezed his daughter's shoulder, looking into her eyes questioningly. Mary screamed from the pain. "Don't you dare harm her, you brute!" Doug shouted, trying to rush to her side, but was immediately stopped by a couple of burly men. "Let's cut to the chase, Alejandro. What do you want?" Mr. Greenspan asked, struggling to contain his anger. "Now, that's a sensible approach," murmured the satisfied man. "I want to collect the full price from you, Anthony, from you and from my son-in-law." "You're not going to calm down, are you?" Mr. Greenspan asked him icily. "Let me guess. I'll give you half of my company again, along with the shares?" Alejandro, however, only shook his head negatively. "No, half isn't enough for me now. you and your son will give me everything you've got." "And if I refuse?" asked Mr. Greenspan, also calmly. "That's your right, but then I'll kill both my negligent daughter and your scoundrel of a son for blowing her head off and letting her believe that she can have any other life than the one I have chosen for her." "You wouldn't dare do that!" Doug stepped forward. "And Dad, I'm ready to sign whatever is required of me, just so long as Mary stays alive." Mr. Greenspan looked at his son carefully, then nodded. "All right, son. I can't lose you again." "Great," stretched out a happy Alejandro in anticipation of making the most lucrative deal of his life. "What about Mary? Are you going to let her go?" Doug asked Alejandro. "Of course," the man lied. "What do I need her for? She's a traitor to me and her mother from now on. I won't let her on my doorstep." Suddenly, strange sounds echoed from behind the warehouse wall. It took Alejandro a split second to realize they were police sirens. "You scoundrels!" he shouted angrily, aiming his gun first at Doug, then at his father. "Now I'm going to turn you both to dust. I don't know whom to start with." At that moment, a SWAT team burst into the warehouse, shouting loudly, "Everybody stay where you are! Everybody down!" Minutes later, all the criminals were arrested. Doug looked regretfully at Mary, who was being examined by the medics. They were preparing to take her to the hospital. "Mary, Becky, I don't care about your real name and about your father," Doug said, taking her hand. "I will love you no matter what." "Doug, beloved, I really didn't think you would find me," the girl responded in a weak voice. "When I realized you might get hurt, I was so scared that I was ready to part with you, just so you wouldn't be in danger. If something had happened to you, Doug, I wouldn't have survived it." Doug wanted to say more to his beloved, but the doctors asked him to step back. They were going to take Mary to the hospital. "Don't worry, son, the doctors will take care of her," his father consoled him. "At first, I thought Mary, or Becky, knew everything, but then I realized she didn't need to. She's not like her parents, and she's incapable of betraying the man she loves." "I know, Dad," Doug replied tiredly. "I don't care who her parents are. I'm going to marry her. I love her, Dad." Mr. Greenspan only smiled at his son and patted him on the shoulder. 2 weeks later, when Mary was discharged, she accepted Doug's proposal with tears of happiness in her eyes. The wedding occurred on the seashore, and it was a stunning event. Doug received an excellent education and became a successful businessman. Over time, he assumed control of his father's company. Mary completely disowned her father, who was imprisoned for life. She changed her name, thereby burying her past. Now, Mary is raising 3 children, born from her happy marriage to Doug. Every day, Doug thanks God for giving him the opportunity to find his true family and the chance to find the closest and most cherished people to him.